What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the LA Soccer Hub show. We had a crazy weekend. We had El Trafico that happened on Saturday. Obviously, both LA teams went at it. Insane game. Obviously, lives up to the hype. These goals, you could always guarantee. And if I was a betting man, you could always guarantee there's going to be like, what you want to say, more than 3 goals in this game. And every time they face it is like goal after goal after goal. And like they never disappoint. And El Trafico always delivers. And here to help me talk about all that, we got Justin Ruderman. Justin, how you doing?
Doing well, man. Always fun for an El Trafico. And as you say, we're used to, especially overseas, derbies are 1-0 games. They're tight defensive type of games, but not an El Trafico. It never is. It's always a very, very high scoring game. And that is what the fans want. It's very entertaining.
Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, this game was a lot of back and forth. But what I would say, the the lead up to this game, it wasn't as I know you and I were talking about a couple of the people in the press box. We're talking about like the lead up to the game, it wasn't as anticipated as other El Tráfico games. And I think some of us talked about, was like, obviously there's not a rival. You don't have to maybe that Chicharito Vela, the Ricky Pooch versus Chiellini, kind of like back and forth kind of died out. And maybe the Messi effect too. Maybe everybody's on tension to obviously on Messi. But what were your thoughts on the lead up? Because I didn't feel like the hype was as big as other Tráficos.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, theoretically, it should have been one of the most hyped ones, right? Playoffs on the line for both teams, seeding on the line for both teams. A really important game in terms of that playoff race, especially for Galaxy, who are, we'll get to probably out of the race now. But it's weird that we kind of felt like there wasn't that hype. And I think, you bring up Messi, the effect of, we just had Messi at at BMO Stadium, and that was kind of the hype for the month or whatever you want to phrase it that way. I think as well the point you bring up about Chicharito is important because imagine if Chicharito versus Vela at BMO Stadium on Mexican Independence Day. That would have been quite the show. But obviously Chicharito's injured, so that storyline was not there to be had. And so yeah, it did feel like maybe there wasn't quite the same anticipation, but it didn't end up mattering on the pitch, did it?
No, it didn't. Obviously, no. But yeah, I thought that was just like one of the interesting things. But yeah, you mentioned obviously Chicharito versus Vela. That was the thing. Obviously, on Mexican Independence Day, I did see a lot of Mexican flags, a lot of Mexican theme, jerseys and everything right before the game, which was cool. And obviously, LAFC had the fan fest right before the game. Saw that going in, and just saw a bunch of Galaxy fans too, going at it. And it's like it's always good. Like these games are always like once you're there and you see the atmosphere and the little banter back and forth. Obviously, it's always going to be on social media. It's always going to be on Twitter. But it's good. It was good. I think also too, like the game, the first half was back and forth. A lot of back and forth. Obviously, you had LAFC with the opening goal with Boanga in the 23rd minute, and then right after that, Billy Sharp scored in the 25th minute. And then Ryan's Hollingshead right before half, back and forth. What did you take of that first half in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think LAFC were the dominant team throughout, but I think in that first half, it was, as you say, a little bit more back and forth. Galaxy were maybe able to find some chances that they weren't able to find in the second half, which made it a much more entertaining game. I feel like, it felt like at halftime that it was still up in the air, despite LAFC being the better side throughout the game, right? But yeah, it was everything that you would want, really.
Yeah, and then I love the back and forth, because it's just like the nail biting, and then to start the second half, Maya Yoshida, trouble pronouncing his name, he tied it at the 59th minute, and then you felt it was 2-2. It was 2-2, and then a mistake. It was a mistake by the Galaxy. I forgot. It was a Mavinga who passed it to Boanga. Um, the Galaxy shoot themselves in the foot because I felt like, at 2-2, it's anyone's game. But when you commit an error like that and you give the ball to Buanga on a breakaway goal, I think that's when pretty much the game was over, 3-2. Even though it was pretty close, even though they had sub coming in, we've seen throughout the year Galaxy shooting themselves in the foot, and obviously this one hurt them as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure LAFC will have that same mentality on the goals that they gave up, right? A little bit fluky, especially that first one where it's just a mentality thing of what you're not switched on right after the goal, and Galaxy was. Billy Sharp was switched on, right? And that's the difference. Steve Cherundolo, I think, said after the game that he believes that was the first time that's happened under his reign at LAFC. So he's not going to overreact, but he's obviously very, unhappy with that type of switching off, because that can't happen in any game, much less a Derby El Trafico. And so there were, a couple goals from each side probably that they wouldn't have liked to concede, but that's how the game goes. You got to be able to capitalize on those chances, whether it be your own creation or your opponent's mistakes.
Yeah, what'd you think of the front three for LAFC? Because obviously we had a different front three. Mario didn't get the start. Christian got the start. And what'd you think about that?
Yeah, well, this, I mean, going into the LAFC formation, because I think it's all part of one piece, right? For me, the starting of Kike, the benching of Mario, Vela in the 9, it's all a result of the change in formation that LAFC implemented and that Steve Cherundolo implemented, because, we talk a lot on this podcast about how we haven't quite seen those tactical adjustments from Steve that have really affected games and won games for LAFC, won them points that we saw a ton last year and early in this season. But this felt like reminiscent of that, a return to the Steve Cherundolo tactician with players that were doing exactly what they were supposed to. He shifted back into that double pivot with Ilie Sanchez and Kellen Acosta in midfield, which I don't think that we have seen since early on this season. But it worked very well early this season. So I was, surprised that we haven't seen it very much. What that allowed is for a 4-4-2 defensive shape while being solid in possession. So in possession, there's always those two defensive midfielders there preventing Puig and Delgado from speeding up the game on the counterattack, right? But we know that Galaxy really like to possess the ball, play through you. So that means that the defensive shape is probably going to be the most important, which normally a 4-3-3 for LAFC, but not in this game. Instead, they dropped both wingers back into a 4-4-2, pushing Mateus Bogusz, that's pure 10 in a double pivot, right? Pure 10, pushing him next to Vela as a front 2. And that worked really, really well, not only for preventing Galaxy from playing through, because it's just congested when you have 8 men behind the ball constantly for LAFC, right? Puig played 90 minutes, 70 completed passes, not a single chance created for the entire game. And that is because of the changes that LAFC made here. But on the counter attack for LAFC, it also benefited, right? It wasn't just the defensive structure, because it means that Vela's coming underneath as a false 9 to pick up the ball he's dropping in a similar way that Bogusz is going to do. But Vela's obviously a little bit better and a little bit higher. So when he comes, picks up the ball, he can then turn and attack opponents in a way that Mario Gonzalez wouldn't be able to do. Further than that, you now have Kike Oliveira and Denny Bouanga, two very, very pacey wingers, overlapping them along with the fullbacks, Diego Palacios and Ryan Hollingshead, who both also had very important goal contributions in the match. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, I like what I saw from Kike and how explosive he was and everything. And you needed a different look. We talked about it last week from LAFC. Mario Gonzalez it's gonna take him time, but you needed someone else there up in the front three, and you saw the explosion on the wings, and then the counterattacks was where Galaxy really suffered. That's I think the last couple goals. Or the final goal was from a counterattack, and you saw how easy Galaxy were able to get broken down on those counterattacks, because we know how weak their defense is. And for me, the strongest thing about the Galaxy is if they can control the ball, they can control the possession and everything like that. Right? We've seen what Ricky Puig can do at times. But if you can limit them from holding that, and then you have the counterattacks, you have the speed, obviously with Bouanga and Vela and Christian Oliveira, sometimes Vela, right? But yeah, that to your point, that was really good, and I think it maximized them to be able to get on those counterattacks, get the ball, and bam, and go. And I think with Mario Gonzalez, sometimes he's not as quick as the other guys, and I think that really opened up the game. And I think it's also like those adjustments you're gonna have to do per team, right? It's maybe it switches up when you face St. Louis. Maybe it switches up when LAFC go to Philadelphia. So those are a couple of different things, and it was a good tactic by Steve Cherundolo on that end.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something, we didn't see at the Rose Bowl. And it really changed the game. I think you can add Maxime Crepeau to this list. His ball playing ability out of the back was part of the reason I believe he probably got the start as well. So just a lot of different pieces going in. Add Timothy Tillman. This is why he wasn't in the starting lineup, because he didn't necessarily fit that double pivot and doesn't fit that 10. He is the most probably pure number 8 in the LAFC lineup. So all of these personnel decisions fit into the tactical decisions from Steve Cherundolo, excuse me, and they all went, in my opinion, perfectly on the night.
Yeah, no, it was good. And we talked about it last time that we needed to see Maxime Crepeau. We weren't sure if Steve Cherundolo was going to do it. He did. He went with that, even though he did get scored on 2 times. Look, it's a Trafico. Things are going to happen. But I think, yeah, now it's Maxime Crepeau's job for the rest of the year, in my opinion, unless something crazy, crazy happens. Moving forward, I do want to talk a little bit more about Ricky, because even though we did mention about the great job LAFC did, Ricky is one of the best midfielders in the league, and what he's done. And I was very, very surprised that he wasn't able to open up the game a little bit more. He was stuck a couple of times, and the creativeness of what we've seen from Ricky at times hasn't been able. We didn't really see it this game, and I think I was really confused why he wasn't able to open up. Maybe it was the limit play with the Galaxy. Obviously Tyler Borders always had a couple big chances, and I felt like anytime Tyler Board had a couple opportunities, he would be able to come in and do all this. But like two guys that have historically broken down LAFC and scored on them, Tyler Board and Ricky Puig, didn't do as much as I expected them to do this game. Maybe it was a tougher game. What were your thoughts on Ricky and Tyler Board?
Well, yeah, Ricky, I think was a result of the LAFC system that we were just talking about. Boyd, I think, had a couple chances that maybe he didn't quite capitalize in the way that he did in previous El Traficos. I mean, a couple of his goals were just real incredible stunners, bangers from long distance that were just incredible class from Tyler Boyd, and that's not going to happen every single game. Even if you get those chances from 20 yards out to shoot, you're not always going to put them in the top corner. So, excuse me, I think. Yeah, I think he maybe had a couple chances, probably fewer than he did previously due to the success of LAFC in this match. But yeah, you can't expect him to score bangers every time, I guess.
Yeah, right. Like but you and I were talking about like the first couple of times he touched the ball. We're like, this probably is a goal. This may be a goal. Like that's what you and I were talking about, because I think he was just outside the 18. We're like, oh, I think he had kind of like a breakaway, or the ball went a little further. I don't recall exactly what happened. And I looked at you and we're like, this is probably a Galaxy goal, because that's just like the expectation that we have of him, right? And then unfortunately, it just didn't go his way. But yeah, there was opportunities, especially in that first half, for him. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Galaxy moving forward, because they sit in 13th place. They didn't get any points, and we got to look at their schedule coming up, because if they're gonna make it, which is going to be tough. They got Minnesota, I believe, at home this Wednesday. Then they go to Austin. They go to Austin FC, and then they come back at home versus Portland, Seattle, Minnesota, RSL, and then FC Dallas. So they got 7 games to see if they can make it in the playoffs. What are your thoughts, obviously, after what we just saw from the Galaxy this Saturday?
Yeah, I think it's a long shot at this point. I think it's difficult for them to get in it. I think they needed at least a point, if not 3, from this match in order to stay in that race. But I will say it probably benefits them, that schedule that you just read off, because every single one of those teams is a Western Conference team, and a few of them are around that bottom, right? Austin, Dallas, Portland are all in that race with Galaxy for those final couple spots. So if Galaxy are able to beat those teams, that could definitely help them out, which is why, as we know in MLS, there's always a chance. Theoretically, there's always a chance. But yeah, definitely got harder for them after that El Trafico loss.
Yeah, they have a possibility. Say they win out, they would get 51 points, which I think they would put them in the playoffs.
Oh yeah.
7 games, and you mentioned all these, even Minnesota, who's an 8 seed, RSL's in 6 seed. Yeah, a lot of chances, opportunities for them to pick up points, and obviously keep the other teams at bay where they're at. So we'll see. I'm still like, I feel like it's the same story almost every year. Oh, I got something in my eye, excuse me. I feel like it's the same story every year with the Galaxy, with just different things. But I think we talked about it last year. Let's talk about the moves that they made, right? With Fagundes, with Barrios, with Billy Sharp. The way they did it this year with the sanctions and all those different things. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's been like a thing that they've stood out, and how they've been able to do it. And and I think next year is going to be their year to make a deeper run, be a real threat, because everything happened this season with Chris Klein and all those different things. But if you're able to do what they did this year with the midseason pickups and with how difficult it is to navigate, obviously you can only imagine what they could potentially do next year.
Yeah, and look, I'm not an expert on the Galaxy front office, but what I will say is that I personally attribute all of this to Will Kuntz. The former, second in command at LAFC went over to Galaxy, and I think he's making all these decisions with Chris Klein gone. Probably Vanny has something to do with it, but this to me is. I put out a tweet a little bit ago on my Upper 90 account saying Will Kuntz to me is the best signing of the MLS season outside of Miami, because he may not be a player, but the moves that he was able to produce, Maya Yoshida on a free, Billy Sharp on a free, Diego Fagundes for Memo Rodriguez plus 300K. That's an incredible deal. You had Tony Alfaro for 125K, Cerrillo for 200K. Those aren't top players, but the cheap. And then you sold Efrain Alvarez for $2.2 million, which is just
That's
an
the biggest one. Yeah.
unbelievable price when his contract's about to end. It's just, I don't know how you get that kind of money. So to me, Will Kuntz has had an incredible transfer window. And when you consider that he was that Galaxy have a transfer ban, they couldn't do any international transfer business outside of Yoshida and Sharp, who were free agents. It limited him so much, yet Galaxy still had one of the best summer transfer windows in the league. It's an unbelievable work from Kuntz, and in my opinion, he needs to be named the general manager of LA Galaxy as soon as possible.
Yeah, the job I even said it when they signed him, they needed someone like that. And then Will Kuntz, yeah, we weren't sure like what exactly was, but now we see his capability and how creative Will Kuntz was this year and what he had to do. I mean, you got to applaud him, obviously, in what you can do. And that's what I'm saying. You can only imagine what he will do moving forward next year and with those opportunities with the DP and all these different things, what they're going to do next year. Because if you can do this with the limited sanctions and get this creative, you can only imagine what will be happen for next year. And and we'll
And
see.
I think
Go ahead.
I think we can throw in that, right? Because there was a lot of talk about Chucky Lozano to LAFC. Galaxy were the ones interested. Will
Yeah.
Kuntz was the one going after Chucky Lozano, trying to get him obviously for the winter because Galaxy couldn't sign him this summer. But he was already working on that deal 6 months ahead of time, trying to make that the DP signing. That is the level that Will Kuntz is going for. So yes, Galaxy fans should have high expectations because Will Kuntz has earned those high expectations, in my opinion.
No, dude, he's a stud. What he's done, and even when he was at LAFC, yeah, and I'm not surprised. And finally, that Chris Klein's gone there. I think there's gonna be so many big names and build that foundation properly. Look, it's been a lot of years for the Galaxy, but I think now you finally have a guy that can help you out and do a lot of different things there.
It's probably also part of the reason that Galaxy felt comfortable letting Chris Klein go. Not quite on the same level of operations, but probably had something to do with it.
Yeah, no, I would agree, but I feel like it's kind of weird that you didn't realize that before.
Oh, true,
With
true.
Chris Klein,
That's what I'm
right?
saying. Maybe they felt like, well, we don't have another guy who's like the big time that can help us run this club. Obviously, Klein was more on the running the club, and Kuntz is more on the player personnel side. But still, to me, it's like, okay, well, we have this guy who can run this club now, and we don't need Klein anymore, basically.
Yeah, no, yeah. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see what happens with them. Yeah, but I think a big offseason is coming for the Galaxy, like really, really big. We'll see, we'll have to see what they get because Chucky Lozano's obviously off the table now that he signed with PSV, but that's the big thing. Yeah, I mean LAFC, they stay up in the the standings. Excuse me, they stay in second place with 43 points. Like we said, they're going to St. Louis, who's number one, 49 points. That's going to be a good matchup. It's going to be a good matchup. The top two clubs in the MLS and the Western Conference going at it, and LAFC gets to travel to St. Louis. Two big road matches. Yeah, they're going to get tested here, the final games of the season. And obviously, we have Campeones Cup the 27th, the next Wednesday, not this Wednesday, next Wednesday, for them to win a trophy. I'm like, I know it's Campeones Cup. I don't think it's that big of a trophy. I know you tend to think otherwise. But let's talk about these two games in Campeones Cup.
Yeah, I mean, St. Louis is a massive game, right? I mean, if you want to have any chance of getting that CONCACAF Champions Cup berth, next season, you got to win the West. And the only way to win the West is to beat St. Louis. You don't beat St. Louis, I think you're out of the race for winning the West, my opinion. So that to me is as big of a game as LAFC have left. Real Salt Lake is going to be a big game too, following up because they're also right around that top 4, top 5 area. But Campeones Cup is the interesting one to me because, as you say, it's kind of a money grab trophy in addition, community shield, whatever you want to equate it to, Super Cup type of trophy, but it is still a trophy. And LAFC do not have a trophy yet this season after having, 2 last season, an incredible year, and they had high expectations, reaching that CCL final, et cetera, et cetera. So while, yes, it may not be quite an MLS Cup or a CCL or even a US Open Cup trophy, it is still a trophy. And for LAFC, that is a big one. And a piece of that, too, is that it's against a Liga MX powerhouse, right? One of the biggest clubs in Mexico. And Steve Cherundolo has, as we've talked about repeatedly on this podcast, has not shown the ability to beat top Liga MX teams. The only Liga MX team he has beaten is Juarez, right? So I think after the embarrassment to the León, the fumbling of the lead against Monterrey, there are a couple storylines that lead this to being a bigger game than it might have been ordinarily.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I guess look, it is a trophy that they haven't won. But yeah, it's like a one-off. That's why, look, yeah, if you win it, you win it. If you don't, you don't. But obviously, I'm more in the tournament type of thing setting. But yeah, if they win it, obviously great. If they don't, then obviously there's gonna be those questions about beating a Liga MX team and all these different things. But look, it's not gonna be easy, even though it's gonna be a Wednesday game. So yeah. And they have to finish off this season pretty strong. So yeah, look, it's a big stretch of games for them because they have a game essentially these next 2 Wednesdays coming up. Yeah, and that's not going to be easy, especially especially to close out the year and see if they can get first place in the Western Conference. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
Just touch on Crepeau real quick. Welcome back. I think it's incredible. 315 days out, and it's easy to, just kind of pass over those 315 days and kind of say, well, he recovered, he did all the work, this and that. But recovering from the injury that he had, where he snapped both of those bones in his leg, just completely snapped them through, and he's been working and working day in, day out. To me, it's something that should be applauded, and it'll be interesting to see, of course, going forward, whether he remains that starter or not, because I think he should, but it's a big decision for Steve Cherundolo to make, as we discussed last week on this podcast.
Yeah, to me, I think he stays. I mean, he's looked good. Obviously, he got scored on twice, but look, to the Trafico. But yeah, shout out to Maxime Crepeau and what he did. It's been a long year for him to get back, and it's the perfect time LAFC need him going right into playoffs. And I think the remaining of these games of the season is definitely going to help him out for that playoff push, and just to get him in rhythm, get him, in well, I don't want to say game shape because he's not necessarily like running up and down, but just game shape mentally, everything else around, and those different things that a keeper needs, those reps, those first team reps that he needs. And I think, to close out, to me, he stays as a starting goalkeeper number 1. But yeah, it's going to be interesting here to finish off the year. But with that said, guys, appreciate you guys for hopping on. For Gio, this is Justin. We'll catch you guys next time.